guys, welcome back to my channel. So, like the title says, this is going to be a favorites video. I was going to attempt to kind of do like a one big collective video, but here's the deal. I read a lot every year, and it was hard to narrow this down to just 10 books. So this video that you're seeing is going to be my top 10 2018 releases of the year. There were many, it was hard to choose. And then the part 2 video of this is going to be my top 10 backlist titles, as in books that were published prior to 2018 that I just happened to read in 2018 and think they need some love. So without further ado, let's get into the countdown. I tried to order these. Like, I actually have these going in order of like my 10th favorite, which is still like up there on my list, to my number 1 favorite of the year. It was very hard to order these though. Like, any of these could kind of switch around on the list, but this is the order that I feel like the most passionate about. So coming in at number 10, I have the Case Quotient by Helen Hoang. This was so precious. This is a book that I probably wouldn't have picked up had my friends not recommended it to me like time and time again, and I'm so glad that they did. This is a new adult romance that is just so stinking cute. It follows a woman who is on the autism spectrum and doesn't think that she is fully grasping her sexuality and her romantic life to the fullest. Like, she feels like she's inadequate in the dating world, even though she's really successful in every other part of her life. So she hires a male escort to kind of teach her how to be good at sex and dating, and it turned into the cutest romance. I love this book. It was so good and representative and diverse. It was adorable. I loved this so much. Both characters I just swooned over, so this is definitely making the list for 2018. Coming in at number 9 is Little Do We Know by Tamara Ireland Stone. I just recently discovered Tamara Ireland Stone, and she is quickly becoming an auto-buy author for me, and this was her 2018 release, and this was so good, and I feel like this was so underhyped, but this is basically following 2 girls who were best friends and had a falling out prior to the start of this book, and we go back and forth between their perspectives and just kind of find out what happened between them and what is currently happening to them and what they're going through. But what I loved about this book is the conversation that it opened up about religion in the modern world. It is in no way preachy, it doesn't push anything on you, but it focuses a lot on growing up in a very strictly faith-driven family and how that can affect you growing up and how you can question things that you always thought were true to your family and to your beliefs. And it was just, I feel like this is the ultimate modern coming-of-age tale, where not only are you coming into your own as an adult and as like a young adult, going through like high school and college and friendships and relationships, but it also focuses a little bit on spirituality, which I don't think is represented very often, and this was such a healthy conversation about it. It was so good. Number 8 on this list is also in the contemporary vein. I have other genres coming up, I promise, but these were just ones that I just really knew had to make the list. And that is Girl Made of Stars by Ashley Herring Blake. This book is a hard hitter. This is definitely a very triggering book. It has a lot of content warning. This is following a girl and her twin brother who were best friends through their entire lives when their mutual best friend accuses the twin brother of raping her, and really how that affects everybody involved in the situation. So not only are we dealing with the very touchy subject of that, but we're dealing from it internally from the family of the person who did it, not the victim. We're also following the victim side of it, but we're also following his side of it and how it affects the family, how the family just kind of automatically picks sides, and how it affects the relationship between the twins, because she always held her brother up in such high esteem. And it starts to question her morals and ethics versus like the love of a family member or a sibling or your best friend. It just, ooh, this book was a hard hitter. I cried ugly tears while reading this. It was just so well done and well discussed in this book. Again, if you guys haven't picked this up and that sounds at all intriguing to you, I highly recommend it, because this is such a vital and important story that needs to be told in this day and age. Ugh, I love this book. Coming in at number 7 is actually Thunderhead, which I have lent out to my mother at this point, but this is the sequel to Scythe, and I feel like all of the books that are in the series are gonna make it on my top list of every year because they are just so thought-provoking. I read these back to back, so spoiler of what book is going to be included on my next video in this series, because I adored Scythe as well. But this is the sequel, so I'm not going to get into any sort of spoilery type things, but it just is a continuation of this world that Neil Shusterman developed that is amazing. So basically this is following a world where all causes of death have pretty much been eliminated. They can always revive you. There's no more diseases or illnesses that lead to death, and you can just kind of keep on living and living and living and living. So the only way that the society has developed to deal with overpopulation is by declaring people scythes, which are these people who have been elected to basically be the bringers of death, and they choose it based on their own ethics and based on like statistics and scientific facts of like how many people have to be killed off every year, and it's kind of like a blessing to be killed by a scythe, like you're doing something for the greater good because you're helping humanity progress. It was, every single page in this book is the most thought-provoking thing I've ever read. It's such a unique concept, so the sequel to this definitely had to make the list. Coming in at number 6, I have Give the Dark My Love by Beth Revis. This book came out of nowhere and it blew me away, and I am still going to sing its praises because I still feel like nobody is reading this book, and I think it was so good. So this is a fantasy world that is set in a kingdom where a plague is basically wiping out the impoverished people. Our protagonist in this is a girl who comes from one of these impoverished villages and sees firsthand what the plague is doing, and goes to this very elite academy to study alchemy and medicine and try and find a cure for this plague, and she is very gifted at it, and she gets taken under this one teacher's wing to like study beyond her level that she's at, and it starts to branch into the realm of necromancy. So this is one of those books. The setting is so vivid and atmospheric that you just feel completely absorbed in it. One huge plus that I have in this is that there is a tiny drop of romance thrown in there, and it in no way affects the protagonist. Like, none of her decisions are swayed by the love interest, and none of the story plot lines are affected by the romance. It just happens to be a little like back subplot, and I loved that. It was very unique and it was refreshing to read, to be honest. And also this has an ending that I am still thinking about, and I cannot wait for book 2. Like, this has an ending that I personally adore. It was like the last sentence dropped, I shut the book, and I was like, 5 stars. It was one of those endings. I loved it. The next book that I have to include, that I'm sure almost everybody is including on their top 10 list, is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is not close to my number 1 slot, but I mean, it has to be included because I feel like this is such a masterpiece and such like a modern piece of YA fantasy right now. So we all know what this is about. A girl who is in the Feylands and is just kind of like dealing with the cards she's been dealt, and doesn't like the Fae. The Fae are all terrible to her, and she kind of just rises above them, and it was just such a victorious, brutal, bloody story. I love this. She wove such a fantastical world that's so different from everything else that you've ever written. So, I mean, I'm sure everybody has read this at this point, but if you haven't, I recommend it. It's very different and bleak compared to most YA fantasy. Coming in at number 4 is The Wicked Deep by Shay Earnshaw. This is a debut book by Shay, and oh my god, this woman is so talented with her words. This is the most atmospheric and everything about this book was just breathtaking. So this is set in a small coastal town, and I feel like what I loved about this so much was the setting. You felt like you were there. You could smell the bakery. You could see all of the docks, and everything was just so vividly described. That's the main reason that I love this. And the story was also very unique. It's very reminiscent to Practical Magic and Hocus Pocus, in that there are 3 witches who come back every single year and embody 3 young girls every summer. This just happens. The town's just okay with it, and I don't know why. They just accept the fact that these 3 girls, who are embodied by the spirits of old witches, lure boys to their watery graves. Like, they sing men out into the ocean and murder them. So it's a little dark, but I loved it. I loved everything about this. This book is physically beautiful. This book is internally beautiful. I recommend this time and time again to so many people. Number 3 is actually a new adult book, which totally blew me away that it was this far up on my list, but I just adore this book. And that is The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. This is my first dabbling into K.A. Tucker, and I'm steadily working my way backwards through her books because this one was so good. So this is my favorite romance of 2018. If you guys like romance, if you guys like any sort of story involving family relationships and just I don't know, traveling and self-discovery type of stories, this is a book for you. Basically, this is following a young woman who gets a call from her long-lost father, that basically he is dying. He has cancer, he doesn't have very long to live, and she gets a call to basically go visit him before he passes away. So obviously she grew up without this father figure in her life and with her single mother, and she's a little jaded about this. But she realizes this is kind of a last opportunity to get to know this guy and discover what happened between him and her mother. So she flies to Alaska. It kind of has the tropey, like, city girl out of her element vibe to it, but it was done in such a loving and caring way that you just adored Kala, the protagonist in this. But while she's there, she meets a, like, gruff countryman, and romance ensues. We know where it's going. But what got me about this book is, like, the relationships in this. This is such a character-driven plot, and I think it just took me by surprise because I was not prepared for the amount of emotion that I developed for these characters, because out of nowhere, I was just sobbing, like, in this book. Like, there were just some scenes that just hit me out of nowhere, and I didn't think that I was loving it as much as I was until emotional turmoil hit, and I was just like, oh my god, this book is amazing and beautiful. So, it's number 3 on my list. That's like, you should read this. It's good. Coming in at number 2 is a book that I am so glad I squeezed in right before I filmed these videos, because I knew that it had a chance of making this list, and oh man, I'm so glad and so appreciative that I actually took the time to read this. And that is The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. Whew. This is the most beautiful book that I've read in years. I was listening to this while I was at work, and then I finished, like, physically reading it. And there were so many times where I literally just had to take my headphone out and be like, oh my god, that was stunning. Like, the way this woman weaves words together, I've never read anything like it, where, like, almost every single sentence is just dripping with, like, description and color, and I feel like this is a 5 senses type of story. Like, you can smell everything, like, you can see vividly all the colors that she's describing, and she uses colors as adjectives for feelings and for scenes, and oh my god, I think I'm gonna make a full review of this if you guys would like that, because there are so many thoughts that I have about this book. But again, this is a book that deals with coming of age, but it also deals with grief and coming to terms with grief, and it deals with it in, like, a magical realism way that is just stunning, and everything about this book was just delicious. This was definitely, like, an emotional read, but in the best way possible. So this is actually, like, out of nowhere, out of all of these books that I read this year, this flew up to number 2, almost number 1. It was a little hard to dethrone number 1 in my opinion. But if you guys have this on your radar, it's worth picking up. I promise you. And coming in at number 1, I don't think people are going to be surprised about this because I'm still talking about it. That is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This book came out of nowhere. Like, it came out of left field, and I was like, oh, I should pick that up. And I started reading it, and I read it in one sitting. This is a lengthy adult fantasy book. That's a lot to do. Again, this is a debut book. I feel like I have so many debut authors on this list that their first book was, like, unbelievable, and I have no idea how they're gonna surpass their debut book. But this is one of them, and I can't wait for book number 2. But this, I have an entire review about this. I will leave that linked down below. But this is just a stunning, Asian-inspired fantasy story that deals with self-sacrifice and, like, coming to terms with, like, the world you live in, and I don't know how to do this book justice in, like, a very short amount of time, so just go check out my review if you want to see my full thoughts on it. But it was just so well done, and it also touches on historical information from our actual world in a very brutal way. So this book is definitely not for the faint of heart. It has some of the most gruesome and graphic scenes I have ever read in a book before, and I read some dark stuff, and this one pushed my boundaries, but god, it was worth it. It was so good. Ever since I read this in the summertime, I knew this was going to be number 1 for the entire year, and it was going to be very hard to dethrone it, and so far nothing really has. So I adore this book. I will sing its praises till the end of time. But that completes my top 10 of the year, plus Thunderhead in here. Add one more to this stack. But I had a fairly successful year. I feel like I read a lot of really amazing 2018 releases, but these are definitely my top picks of the year. So that's gonna be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it, and if you haven't picked any of these books up, I'm gonna recommend these. These are my top books to read of 2018. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching this, and I'll see you guys in part 2 coming in a little bit. Okay, see you then.